Okay, it looks like we're live, Chase. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for
We
having me.
we have a great lineup of information, but let me first start by introducing myself to everyone. I'm Marissa Maruli. I'm part of the communications team here at Coffey. We're so excited to be streaming with you live today. And as I mentioned, we have a great lineup of information from our very own senior project manager, Chase Corbridge, professional land surveyor. And Chase is going to talk to us all about land surveying, which is quite a hefty topic. Normally, we spend our live streams each month talking about something drilled in a little bit further. However, this month we're going to be talking about a very big topic, the overarching land surveying. So Chase has a full plate of information to tell us about today. Hi, Chase. How's it going over there?
Oh, plugging away as usual. It's not too bad.
Good. Wonderful. So that's great. Let's dive right in without further ado. But before we do, I just want to tell everyone listening in today to be sure to stay tuned to the very end, where we're going to open things up to a live Q&A. So if you have any questions at any point about land surveying or anything that we talk about, please feel free to type it into your chat box through Facebook or LinkedIn. And we'll do our best to answer those questions as the conversation allows. And if we don't get to it in the middle of our conversation, we will save them for the very end. So if you do type in a question, we will do our absolute best to answer it before we end our time together today. One more thing I do want to tell everyone is the exciting part is that if you stay tuned to our social media this week, in the next couple business days, you will see that we're going to ask a question on social media that is coming out of what we spoke about today on this live stream. If you are the first person to answer that question correctly, you win some treats from Coffey that will be mailed to you. So stay tuned to our social media, and we hope to have good participation on that one. All right, Chase, it's time I turn the mic over to you. Can you start by breaking down what land surveying is for us?
Sure. So land surveying, in simplest terms, is we describe the character of a particular parcel of land or property. This can include the boundary, the topography, any easements, ditches, rivers, fences, anything that impacts the use or occupation line of a property is considered a character. And that's pretty much what we do is we help people define their property in mathematical and geographic terms.
Wow, so that sounds pretty technical. You measure and assess land for people, dimensions, and all sorts of different calculations. Is that right?
Correct.
Oh, okay. And can you help break down a couple of everyday examples of land surveying that we might see, some tangible examples in everyday life that we might pass on the road to work in the morning?
Exactly that. On the road to work, let's say a highway or even a neighborhood street,
Sure.
to be defined and then laid out for construction by a surveyor. So the highway, the cul-de-sac you live on, the sidewalk, the curb and gutter, every light pole, everything had to be laid out by a surveyor in order to be installed correctly.
Okay, and when you say laid out, Chase, what exactly does that mean? Is that, again, those measurements that you were talking about? Are you telling builders where to place the road, or?
Yes, exactly. So we are telling them where, both horizontally and vertically, to build something, be it a road, be it a sidewalk, a curb and gutter, a light pole, whatever. We give both horizontal and vertical components on everything we stake so that it is installed per what's intended.
Sure, per what's intended. And we'll get into that a little bit deeper when we go over a couple of the projects that you have ready for us to look at today. I love looking at the real life projects, so I'm really excited about getting into that section of this talk today, where we can look at an actual plan and project, one or two, that Chase is working on or has worked on. So that'll be exciting. But first, I just want to ask one more question about kind of defining this topic, land surveying, and getting us a little bit more acquainted with it for those who aren't. Now, you've defined it and you've come up with an everyday example for us. And how about overall, Chase? What would you say is the benefit of land surveying to a community or civilization?
It defines boundaries and ownership in a concrete fashion. It doesn't just exist on a deed or a plat somewhere. You actually see on the ground, you can touch it, you can feel it. So yeah, we help people define their boundaries and components thereof. What they actually own, we help define.
Absolutely. So it sounds like, defining and creating boundaries around ownership is certainly a huge benefit to a community so that, perhaps certain landowners can understand where their land is separated from their neighbors, help prevent a lot of disputes that way, or perhaps even create a couple disputes about that land, which we might
Can it
talk
go
about.
both ways? Yeah.
Yes. But the intention is to help, and have those landowners be, approve of the land boundaries that you create. And the other question I have, or excuse me, not the question, but the other piece that I took away about the benefit to civilization and the community is just simply when you were talking about, a highway, that highway that we would drive over every day to work, or just even a road. The fact that it is assessed by a land surveyor and that a land surveyor did those precise measurements to assure how that road would be built. So it's almost a sense of public safety, would you say, Chase?
Absolutely, yes. A sense of public safety, public welfare, public benefit across the board.
Certainly. And this is a topic that this dives into an area of land surveying that we've covered a little bit throughout our conversations about land surveying this month over social media. And that is construction staking. So that kind of specialty underneath land surveying, Chase, would you say that's definitely a safety benefit to the community, the topic of construction staking? And can you also just break down what construction staking is so that we can, help everyone catch up to what we're talking about?
Absolutely, yeah. So I would absolutely agree that it is a benefit to all, from the highways, from the streets, from the curb and gutter, sidewalks, everything that I've already ranted on about to no end. It is beneficial in that we can. Oh, sorry, I got distracted.
No, that's okay.
Yes.
I was just pulling up. We did make an infographic this week. So I was hoping, or excuse me, this month. So I was hoping to kind of support what you were saying about construction staking here, so that people are able to see kind of the different, again, what we're talking about is a portion underneath land surveying. So one of the specialties of land surveying, as I mentioned earlier, land surveying is a huge topic that covers many specialties. There are many different forms of surveying, but one of the areas that we're diving into right now with Chase is construction staking. And so we have an example of construction staking here, and that's what Chase is talking about. And essentially you're saying, Chase, that it's the interpretation of the design plans, boots on the ground, in the field. Go ahead.
Absolutely, yeah. We are the translators between the design and what is actually built. So we make the paper real, essentially. So yeah, we will interpret the design. We will go beyond the design in many cases, and just kind of put stakes in the ground that define where those structures are built, how they're built. Yeah, from everything. Go ahead.
No, this is just something I, didn't really know the details of prior to diving into this topic this month with you. And I find it so fascinating, just the process of construction staking, again, this specialty under land surveying. And so I'm going to take a stab at what it looks like in everyday life, Chase, and then you tell me if I'm correct or not.
Right.
So as a land surveyor who's on a construction staking task, you're going to arrive to a project site where they're building a building, let's say, and you arrive there with the design plans, and you're on the ground, nothing's built yet, but you're looking at the ground, you're looking at the property, and you're making sure that these design plans do indeed apply to this land, that they're viable on this land, that they'll work on this land. Because a lot of times those designs, the design engineer or the person creating those designs isn't necessarily on the site like you are. So in order to make the designs that the engineer does, they actually just dispatch out a surveyor to collect data for them. And then they bring back to the engineer. The engineer sits at their desk and creates this design, but then someone has to bring the design back out and make sure that it works. So is it true that then you go to this site with these design plans in hand, you assess that they work, and sometimes you're even meeting those tradesmen at the site, you know, the builder or the utility company, and you're saying, hey, you know, this is how to interpret these plans. This is exactly where you need to place this utility. This is exactly where you need to place this concrete.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a good way of phrasing it. Yeah, very succinctly put.
And then, Chase, why is that necessary? Why doesn't the builder or the concrete layer or the utility provider, why don't they just know how to interpret the plans?
Why don't they know is a good question, but they don't appear to. So there's so much room for interpretation and misinterpretation in a lot of plan sets that you need someone with experience in those areas, both on paper and in the real world, and be
Okay.
able to go back and forth. Go ahead.
Okay, so what you're saying is, it sounds like, is there extra calculations that are needed that perhaps a builder or a utility provider doesn't necessarily specialize in finding those locations, finding those precise measurements and dimensions, but that you as a land surveyor, you are able to calculate and perform these very complex mathematics to show exactly where these builds need to be. And then that's the whole point of the staking. That's where the stakes come in. They're literal stakes that you stick in the ground and you say, this is where this needs to go, and this is where this needs to go.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I really like the concept of construction staking. I think it's a really cool specialty under land surveying. So that, again, that's just one small specialty underneath land surveying, and there are many. Chase, how many specialties would you say there are under land surveying? I mean, would you say tens or hundreds?
Probably tens easily, hundreds perhaps.
Wow.
Because there are people who just do, like, say, buildings, just do high rises, who just do underground utilities, who just do little property boundaries. So yeah, easily tens, if not hundreds.
And how many would you say Coffey covers? Again, in the tens, or do you cover quite a bit of land surveying services, or do you just have a few specialties? I don't think that, is it correct to say that Coffey isn't one of those specialty providers? While you might have some specialties, you actually are a little bit more all-encompassing. You offer a few different types of services.
Definitely, yeah. Between all the staff here, we have experience in buildings, in roadways, in property boundaries, in easements, in legal descriptions. We kind of do it all. Even drones, UAVs as they're called, unmanned aerial vehicles. We do surveys with those. And so we have our fingers in every little sampling of the industry.
Oh, it looks like we're just getting a comment in from Dave Coffey, the CEO of our company. Hi, Dave. Thanks for tuning in. I guess he's sending some support to you, Chase.
He is, yeah. He likes to inflate my head.
Well, that's good, right? That's what every manager should do. And we actually do have a question already. So let's just, since we're sort of at a
Mhm.
pausing point, we can take a look at this question. This is actually from one of our colleagues, Drew Burr. Hi, Drew. Thank you for tuning in. Drew was my victim last month, actually. We did a materials testing campaign. So he was my live stream buddy last month, and a lot of help for a lot of materials testing information. If anybody is interested or wants to kind of watch a really cool lab tour that we did, feel free to check out all of our social posts from last month. Okay, so let's see what Drew is asking. He says, Chase, would you say there is a trend of contractors relying more heavily on construction staking compared to the past? Okay, that's an interesting question. I feel like that's kind of an offshoot of me saying, why do these different vendors need construction staking? Why aren't they looking themselves? But again, you were saying it has to do with the precise measurements, and that's what the specialty of a land surveyor and construction staking is. So that's how I'm interpreting this question, that he's saying, are they relying more and more for the construction staking to come in and potentially provide more support?
Certainly. Yeah. There have been untold sites that I've been on where somebody will build something egregiously wrong, but they'll say that's what the stake says. And so they're absolutely relying on us. While we should be facilitators, we are more assuming the liability of what is intended.
Wow. Okay.
So, yeah, the case in which I mentioned where it was curb and gutter that should have flown from or flowed should have flowed from one end of the street to the next. Obviously, there was something amiss, but they built it that way anyway, so they had to go out and tear it out and put it back in.
Wow.
So, yeah,
Wow.
but yes, absolutely, Drew. There's a trend of contractors relying on us, not only as interpreters, but we are the end all be all. What the stake says is what they build no matter what, so that they can shuffle that liability, that responsibility onto us.
Wow. Okay, so that comes with great liability, and actually let's talk about that a little bit, Chase, because that is something that you and I have talked about a little bit this month. We've talked about an example, but essentially you were saying that what happens in that we're really diving into construction staking today. But when we were talking about construction staking, you were explaining that when you interpret these plans on site and you're putting the stakes in various places in the ground, if you see that something with the design does not prove viable in the field in real life, that it's fine on paper, but that actually in real life it doesn't apply, it doesn't work. Can you explain what happens at that point as the surveyor on the job? What do you do next, and what happens to the liability shift there?
To a certain extent, it is up to the survey party chief that is on site, the one who's actually setting the stake, to make that call. Ultimately, it resides with myself or others like me. But yes, it's certainly to an extent on their part. And as soon as they deviate from the plan, even if the plan doesn't work, then all liability falls on survey.
So when you say even when they deviate from the plan, you're referring to the surveyors, right?
Sorry, the contractors. When the contractor wants something that the plan shows otherwise, it is up to our surveyors in the field to make the call whether that is viable. I like that word. Whether it's
Yeah.
a viable and reasonable solution. If it is, then as soon as we deviate from the paper plan, all liability comes back to survey for approving, for lack of a better word, that
Okay.
field change.
So now I'm going to pick your brain further, because this is a new way that I didn't know of. So if you are on site and you determine that the plan doesn't seem to fit, isn't viable on the ground,
Mhm.
you get to make that call as the surveyor
Correct.
and say, you know what? this doesn't look like it's going to work. I'm going to move the stake in this direction. And at that point, when you move the stake or change how the design is, A, you do have the authority to do so. And B, when you do, then you're assuming all liability for that piece of the build.
Correct.
Okay, so that's the part I have down and I got it. But now there's this new piece that I'm kind of becoming aware of, that is, what happens if that call comes from the contractor, one of the tradesmen who are laying the concrete or something, and they say, hey, Chase, before you determine where the stakes go, based on the plans, I have already looked at them and it's not going to work. Wouldn't you say, I know you just explained that, Chase, but to me, that's the contractor asking you to move the stake. So wouldn't the liability, shouldn't it be on the contractor, or no, it does end up still being on you?
It will go to the designer. If we are able to identify it and fix it ahead of time, then it goes to the designer to remedy before we stake it. But yeah, if it's real time and no one noticed through multiple rounds of review that it was a miss, then it comes back to us.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, that's super interesting. So we certainly covered the overall concept of land surveying. We've gone over its benefits to communities and to public safety. And now we've sort of taken a deep dive into one of the topics or specialties underneath land surveying, which is construction staking. It's a super interesting one. I'm glad that we took the dive into it. I think it's, part of what creates the infrastructure of, our communities. So I think that construction staking is certainly a piece of land surveying that is very much intertwined with public safety and the benefit of civilization and communities. So I'm glad that's the one we chose to dive down into, if we were going to dive into any at all. Are there any other parts of land surveying, Chase, or subspecialties that you think are worthy of going over at this point? Or should we kind of just move on to projects? I'll pull up our little infographic here that had a couple more that we called out over the month. And again, this infographic, we're just stating, hey, these are a few of some common types, but again, there are really so many specialties under land surveying.
I guess the other one that I would like to mention is boundary surveying, which is what most people think of when they think of surveying, which
Okay.
is, what do I own? To what extent on the ground do I physically have to occupy, maintain? How does that change? How is it defined? I think that's what most people think of when they think of surveying.
Sure. Yeah. That's the other one that you mentioned earlier, that, that's a huge benefit to people. And I can understand how that could be a really common type of surveying is, what part of this land is mine and what part of this land is my neighbor's.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And actually, we have at least one of our projects today is a boundary survey, right, Chase?
I believe so.
Okay, cool. All right, so let me just remove that from our screen and let's take a look. I think it's time to we could just dive right into one of these projects. So let me pull one up. I'll pull our first one up, which is let me get it. 1 second. Okay, let's get that PDF pulled up. Sorry for the technology delay, everyone. Our stream casting software is not recognizing my PDF. Okay, here we go. All right. How about we start with this one, Chase?
All right.
The topic of the trees.
Yeah, that's a good way to phrase it. So in this example, the client that owned the lot to the south there had hired us.
Try to get this a little. Is this a better view, Chase, or do you want me to zoom out a little more?
No, that's perfect right there.
Good.
So the client to the south had hired us because the neighbor to the north had essentially declared these 5 large trees to be on their property. So they are going to sue our client, the property to the south,
Oops.
saying that they wanted those trees removed because they believe them to be on their side of the line. What we did is we went and we located each of the 5 trees, and we found the property monument on either end, as you can see toward the top of the screen there, which says Lot 5,
Mm-hmm.
and found number 4 rebar with red plastic cap, blah, 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 on either end. So we went out and we recovered those 2 property monuments that defined that line. And then we went out and located the use/occupation line that our client, the one to the south, had been using as their property line for a decade plus.
Okay, so let me pause
Mhm.
us for a minute and kind of break down what I'm interpreting. Okay, so your client is the one on the south, which is going to be the bottom of this PDF. And so they're going to be sort of in relative to the trees in this PDF, they're underneath the trees or south of the trees in real life.
Yes.
So that's your client. And so they have these 5 large trees on their property, but the neighbor to the north of them just decided one day, hey, I'm concerned about these trees. I think they're on my property. Or how did that kind of come about? Let's start there.
Exactly, yeah. So the neighbor, just out of the blue, said, these trees are on my property. Get rid of them.
Oh, okay. So what made do you guys have the information about what made them decide to notice these trees? Because these trees have been there, right? So okay, just one day there was the
Yeah, one day they got a wild hair and decided to raise an issue.
Okay, got it. So they want to discuss these trees. They want to know where the real boundary line is. And so this bold line, and it's kind of a bummer with my PDF. I don't get, my mouse is so small on it. I'm trying to show, I guess I'll just kind of, that's not going to do it either. But basically the area that you can follow my mouse or see my mouse, it's this thick black line, right? So this thick black line is going to be the official boundary line that everyone knows of. Okay.
Correct.
And then
that is the official public record boundary line.
Much better said. Okay, the official public record boundary line. And then this lighter, thinner line right above it that runs along parallel to it, it's called this use occupation line. Now, are you saying that, or could you just define for me kind of what is a use occupation line? What does that define or determine? What does use occupation line mean?
So that is the extent to which the property to the south had been mowing, had been maintaining.
Oh.
There was no actual fence to define that occupation, but they had been mowing to that line. They'd been maintaining all the properties south of that line. It's not shown on here, but there's actually a utility on the far west end, about where the arrowhead of the use occupation line is, that was surveying both properties. So that's where they had believed to be their land the entire time.
Okay, so there was a utility box right over here. If anyone can see my small little mouse cursor there. But so there was a utility box there. And so that's what was making at least the neighbor to the south presume that that was the boundary line and that they could continue to maintain this property up to where that utility box was, let's say. And so they were mowing the grass. They were, at some point, maybe decades ago, planting trees.
Yeah, there's irrigation and all that through there. So
okay, so the use occupation line, to define it simply, it's pretty literally just that, the area that's been used or occupied by a particular person. So again, our client to the south is occupying or using all of this little property all the way up to this thinner line. And so that's the big question. What happens next? We see where you have been occupying, but now what?
So what they did is they pursued an avenue of what's called adverse possession, which means because I have been maintaining, because I've been occupying this land for X amount of years, it becomes mine. So no matter how it's platted, no matter how it's monumented, it's what we call the property corners on either end. No matter what that is, if I observe and if I occupy a certain portion of land openly and notorious, so meaning it's not being secretly held, but openly held and occupied and maintained by myself, after a certain time period, I can claim that as my land.
No kidding. So just like that.
Yep. I want to say the statute is 20 years. So this was just shy of that, but they reached an agreement with the neighbor to the north in this case, to where he was willing to relinquish that little sliver. But
Okay.
otherwise, yeah, if you occupy, if you maintain, if you use a certain portion of land, whether or not it is legally yours,
Right.
it becomes yours.
Okay, so hold on. So there has to be some catch to this, right? So is it just that most people know where their lines are, or presume where their boundary lines are, and then if they start to see a neighbor infringing on that line, then the theory is that they would bring it up to concern sooner.
Mhm.
Like if I owned this piece of land and those trees were not there, if I owned the piece of land to the north and the trees were not there, and suddenly the trees are planted by my neighbor, that would be pretty obvious, and I'd kind of call it right away and call up the town, or call up a surveyor, or call up the neighbor and say, hey, I think that's my land. And in which case then something like this wouldn't go occupied for 10 or 20 years and just become their land because they used it. Is that kind of how?
Yeah, precisely. There is a statute of not statute of limitations, but there is a criteria that again has to be open and notorious occupation.
For that
So,
long.
For that long.
Okay. So that makes sense to me now more, it just makes more sense that people wouldn't get away with, just occupying land, and then they get to own it just because they were occupying it. But
yeah,
okay.
No, the time period is absurdly long.
Yes, and for it to be very notorious and just very open. Okay. I like that example. Anything else notable on this? Well, let's see. I think you said, in conclusion, that the neighbor to the north settled and agreed, because you all came in again for that client to the south and said, hey, this is what we found. We found where the boundary line is that's recorded. However, this is exactly where the south neighbor is using land too, and that this land has indeed been used for 20 years in this way. So it applies under this, statute or regulation, and therefore they are able to have ownership of this land.
More or less, yeah. So it was, the hard part about this one was figuring out when the trees were actually planted, when that occupation became notorious.
And how did you do that? Or is that something you had to do?
It was a professional assessment. The trees are probably 10, 12 years old easily. And the utility line or utility structure at the end of that line had been there since the subdivision was originally created, which was 30 years plus.
Okay.
So that's where they had maintained, that's where they had used. So it was easier in that regard. But based on the trees themselves, again, 10, 12 years.
Wow. Okay. So you had to make an assessment, aside from doing all of the, calculations and surveying with, particular viewing tools to find directions of lines and locations of lines. you had to then also kind of dive into this other area that I've seen before, in talking with different colleagues of yours about public records.
Mhm.
And that how you all are from time to time diving into public records and doing a little bit of recon about, the history of the area and ownership and when subdivisions were built and, word of mouth at the time, if it was recorded anywhere. You guys, surveyors are responsible for diving into that a little bit, right?
Definitely, definitely, yeah.
Wow. Okay, so you're little detectives as well, a little bit. And so that's how you determine. So did all of the standard surveying, processes to determine where these lines are, but then you also dove down a little bit more into public records and you said, okay, here's why I think that this piece of land, this little, smidgen of land between the solid thick black line and the thin black line, this is what makes me think that this piece of land does fall under that special rule
Mhm.
where the neighbor to the south does get to claim it as their own. And you say, A, because you have to kind of state your reasons. A, because these trees look like they're, about 15 years old. And then this utility box was placed 30 years ago.
Mhm. Absolutely, yeah. There's a judgment call there.
And do you have to actually, use that in your report? Do you have
Mhm.
to write those things down?
Yes. Yeah, we have to explain not only mathematically what we did, but judgmentally what we did
Ah,
and the reasoning behind it.
okay. That's a great summary, mathematically and judgmentally. And so, net, what happened is the neighbor to the north
Ac-
understood.
They
And
acquiesced that little sliver, yeah.
I'm sorry?
They acquiesced that little sliver.
Okay. And so, your client to the south and the neighbor to the north, they settled. And so now, does the boundary line get redrawn to this use occupation line, or kind of what happens to kind of close everything out?
There's, as part of the settlement, the legal description that you have pulled up here, the exhibit, was made a legal document. So technically the lines weren't replatted, but they were established as a court decree.
Okay, so to interpret that, I would say that this document then is kept in public records and
Mhm.
it's just kind of describing, look, this is where the boundary line was, this is where the use occupation line is now. And, from reading the report and everything, you can understand that essentially this report is stating that everybody's agreed that the neighbor to the south's property goes, whoops, I scrolled away. But the neighbor to the south's property does indeed get to go up to that use
Yes.
occupation line. Okay.
Yeah, if either property owner were to sell, this would be included in the sale documents.
Okay. Wow. Very interesting. Okay. All right. So let's move on to another example project. I think we have time for one more and then we'll get into any other questions. It does look like we got another question that came in, so we'll try to let me just make sure that it's not related to this exact. Oh, it is. It does look like it's related to this exact project. So let me pop it up here. Okay. From Teresa Grove. Hi, Teresa. Thank you for tuning in. Teresa says, does the surveyor determine the results of adverse possession, or do you need to get a lawyer involved? How does this vary from state to state? That's a great question.
This is a
What do
great
you think,
question.
Chase?
Technically, you do get a lawyer involved. We provide the data, but the ultimate legal process is through an attorney. And state to state, I'm not sure. I believe it's the same in all states, but I can only speak for Colorado, that you involve an attorney and they argue on behalf of the data that we provide.
Okay. Wow.
I hope that answered the question, Teresa.
Yes, it did for me. So yes, that the lawyer, the attorney does get involved, but then essentially your document is the official document that is recorded, and then if that should be furthered in any way legally, that's now up to the lawyers. But that this document is indeed a legal document, and then it can be kind of furthered by a lawyer or
Absolutely.
or fought by a lawyer or whatnot.
Yes.
Okay, great question, Teresa. Thank you. All right, let's move on to the next project, Chase. Let me see here, and bear with me, everyone. The PDF viewer is always a little jumpy, and it just jumps. Okay, let me just zoom out so I can figure out which one. I think this was our next one, right, Chase?
Yes, it was.
Okay, perfect. So should I just zoom in so that we have that drawing kind of in the center?
Yeah, and maybe center it. Yeah, exactly, in the viewer.
Hang on one second. Let me just get it a little bit more pulled up. Okay, now I'll try zooming in. There we go. That's a little better. Okay, how is that?
I can see that.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so in this case, it was a rural property out in Weld County. Obviously, the street is blacked out, but it was part of a large 80-acre piece that had 5 or 6 homes built on it from way back when. But technically, even though there are 5 or 6 houses, it was one property. And so this was one of the houses, one of the homes that asked us to divide off their piece that they had, again, maintained, occupied for a very long time. And we had to write a legal description, and this was recorded in order to create a sublot of that larger 80-acre piece.
Okay, so the 80-acre piece, and it looks like this lot was 20.5 acres based on that middle number there, right in kind of the middle of the lot. Okay, so the 80-acre plot of land was all owned by the same person at some point, but
Yeah.
now everyone's homes that's on this 80-acre plot, they're individually owned.
Mm-hmm.
They're not owned by one person anymore. So they're all individually owned. And so this person comes in and says, well, I want to make mine official, my separation official.
Exactly, yeah. So it was all kind of word of mouth. Oh, John owns to that tree, or Jane owns to that ditch, or whatever.
Yeah.
But it was all handshake deals. Nothing was ever made official until this owner decided to make it official because they didn't want anyone encroaching on their maintained property.
Okay, so they wanted to make it official so that in 10 years from now, some trees don't make them
Exactly, yeah.
create the same issue as our last project.
Precisely.
Okay, so they're making this official. And however, if someone were to start maintaining a piece of their land as if it were that other person's land, and this was continuing on very obviously for over 15, 20 years, then we'd be in the same situation as the previous project, right?
Correct.
But considering that this person that just split off is very aware of their property boundaries, I have a feeling that they won't be letting anyone slowly encroach on their land.
No, they're very possessive of this little 20-acre piece.
Yeah, it's just relative. Little. Maybe for Colorado and Wyoming, but everywhere else, that's a huge chunk. Okay, so what happens next? So you go out there, and is this also boundary surveying?
It is boundary surveying, yeah. So what's not shown on this is we went out and we found the exterior corners of that larger 80-acre piece, and we confirmed that they are where they're supposed to be. Excuse me. And then we wrote a legal description chunking out this 20-acre piece from that larger 80 acres.
I see. And now, so they're official now. They're the
Mhm.
official owners of this 20-acre piece that is now legalized, recorded, and documented. And now everyone, this is public record, right? These documents?
Yeah, not this document per se, but it did precipitate an amended plat that
Okay,
that created this lot out of that 80 acres. So the amended plat is technically the presiding, the official document. This was more demonstrative of what the intent was.
I see. Okay. And so, do you know if any of the other neighbors that were on that 80-acre plot, so the remaining, 60 or, 59.5 acres, those other homes, are they still operating by that those word of mouth agreements? And they
Yes.
just didn't. Okay, so this is the one that's official and recorded out
Yeah,
of.
the amended plat that came from this was recorded. The other existing homes, at least they didn't pursue it through us, and I haven't checked to make sure that they didn't file an amended plat also.
Sure.
But
Okay.
yeah, I believe they're all common.
And so this project was boundary surveying. And then the project that we were just going over previously, I think I failed to mention, that's also boundary surveying, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so the two examples that we went over today were a dive into boundary surveying, and then just through conversation prior to that, we took a little dive into construction staking. So these are two very interesting pieces of the larger topic of land surveying, and I think one can get from this conversation that each facet of land surveying is its own quite large specialty, and that there are many of these subspecialties under land surveying.
Absolutely.
Sure. Okay. Well, I think anything else on this one, or should we move on to just some remaining questions?
I can field some questions.
Okay. Let's see. I don't think we have any more from the audience. We have one other little support message for you from Rob Ladig. He says you're the man, Chase. Thank you for tuning in, Rob.
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
I'm gonna stop our screen here. We'll take Rob's comment off. Okay, so I'm just gonna field the LinkedIn and Facebook one more time and make sure there aren't any other questions. It doesn't look like it. So now we're just gonna ask, I'm just going to ask you a couple final questions that I had in our remaining, almost 10 minutes here, Chase. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay, so here's something that I've been learning over the month of this land surveying topic, is that land surveying is a very old practice, actually pretty ancient. I think, one of the posts that we created this month had to do with that it dates back to the ancient Egyptians in 1400 BC is kind of the first example of land surveying. So fast forward to 2021, I can imagine that the technology, and just that it is a field in technology, and just how fast technology is evolving, that the tools of this trade have evolved quite a bit over the time that this industry has been around. Now, can you tell us a little bit about how long you've been in land surveying, and then B, what you've seen kind of change throughout that process, whether it's just the process of doing something, or you could hone in on a tool that's, drastically changed?
Absolutely. So full disclosure, my father was a surveyor, so I was taught this since I could walk.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, since I was probably 3 or 4, I've been indoctrinated, if you will, into the surveying profession. I've been licensed myself for 14 years.
Okay.
And as far as the tools go, it's come a long way from, the country is broken out with metal chains and a compass. And it's gone a lot tighter, a lot more precise. Now we have total stations. Now we have GPS. It's like in your car, but on steroids, to where we can get within about a quarter of an inch position-wise.
Oh my goodness.
And it's pretty repeatable no matter whether it's sunny, cloudy, raining, windy. If you have someone who can operate the equipment proficiently, they can, excuse me, typically reproduce from one day to the next at that precision, if not better.
Wow.
So yeah, there's always newer, better toys coming out, more precise. You can compensate for atmospheric conditions if it's a humid day, if it's a dry day, again, if the wind is blowing, if it's not. Yeah, it's always getting better and better.
Sure. And I can't imagine what it's like to keep up with that technology. You know, even just my Apple iPhone, you know, it's
Yeah.
like every 6 months it's old and it's
Mm-hmm.
quite a bit to keep up with. So when you say, you know, there are new toys coming out, I'm sure Dave Coffey can testify that it's an expensive trade. And that
It is, yeah. Every new toy is cheaper than the last for sure, or more expensive than the last.
it is more expensive.
Absolutely, yeah. There
Yeah.
are
And
basic tools and basic things that never really change. Like we still use tapes, we still use hammers, nails, everyday household drawer items. But
sure.
the big ticket items always get more expensive, and you're paying for that precision.
And not only that, but that aside from keeping, you know, up with the latest technology, not only do you have to purchase that technology, but you have to take the time to stay on top of how it's changing and to potentially further your knowledge into the newer tool. Again, I use the Apple iPhone example, you know, even our computers or even just, you know, a social media platform like Facebook or Instagram, when they push updates to these softwares or when you have a new device entirely, the way it works changes and you have to take the time to remember or relearn where everything is going to be now and how it's done now. So is there additional training that comes with some of these and that you have to keep up with?
Absolutely, yeah. It's like a new toolbox every time. So there are some things that are legacy, which means you'll go from one generation to the next that is inherent, implicit. But every new tool, every new toy that comes out has little intricacies and little idiosyncrasies that you have to acquaint yourself with in order to use them to their full potential.
Sure, absolutely. And so that takes time and training and
Mhm.
cost to do that too. Okay, so I have one more question for you.
Okay.
Let's see. I have to choose between a couple that I had since we're getting a little close on time. Let's see which one I like the most. Okay, what is the most common request related to land surveying lately that you're getting in Chase? And has that changed recently or stayed the same over time? If it has changed, how? So has the requests that Coffey's receiving related to land surveying, is it more boundary surveying lately or more construction staking lately, that kind of thing?
Lately, there has been a surge of construction just because it's summer, and so this is the time to get it done before the snow starts falling again.
Sure.
But generally, we get called, like I said, when most people think of surveyors, they think of boundary. And so that's what probably 70 to 80% of our calls are a, a dispute between neighbors, or they're trying to install a fence, or something of that nature.
Sure.
And that hasn't really changed. Again, since you said BC, way back in biblical times, throwing a stone and saying that's my property now.
Yeah.
That's kind of always been the case, and it will continue to be the case because people are inherently possessive.
Sure. That's an interesting point. The issues have stayed the same from 1400 BC to today, but the tools and the technology have changed.
Yes, very well said.
Well, you said it. I just reiterated it. You are more eloquent than me. But that's certainly very, very informative and very interesting that, you know, a lot of the requests have remained the same over time, partly due to the nature of humanity, and then also just seasonality. So as you're saying, you know, in the region of Colorado and Wyoming, you all are seeing a lot more construction staking work during summer because of, you know, needing to get projects done prior to winter and weather conditions. And then, you know, but always that common thread of, you know, boundary surveying kind of stays constant throughout.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, I think that's everything today, Chase. You were so helpful to describe for us this giant topic of land surveying, and then also kind of letting us still yet dive into a couple of the more prominent, or at least specialties that Coffey sees a lot right now, which is boundary surveying and construction staking, and those are all examples that are very, you know, tangible for us as individuals listening in. So thank you for that. Is there anything else you wanted to add today that maybe I missed?
Not off the top of my head.
No? Okay. Well, I'll just start to close this since we have a couple, we're a little early, just by a couple minutes. So I'll just leave that time to let everyone know. Again, just remind you all that if you enjoyed our conversation today, please stay tuned. Next month, we'll be covering a new topic. This same time of the month, at the end of the month, on a Thursday around 11 a.m. Mountain Time. We'll be excited to bring you a new topic, and soon we'll be announcing what that topic is. So if you want to prepare any questions for us, you certainly can. Definitely join our mailing list at coffeyeng.com. That's COFFEY.com. Let me pull that up on the screen so that everyone can get that easily. That's where you can go to join our mailing list. And that's when we kind of let you know when we're going to be doing a live stream, and we'll be sending out little infographics, and we only bother you once a month. So that's nice. You don't get a lot of emails from us. We only bother you once a month to announce the live stream and kind of give you a succinct story of what we've been talking about this month. And then we actually do email you one more time an hour prior to the live, just to remind you that we're going live in an hour in case you forgot. So we'd love to have your participation, everyone tuning in more and more. We're happy to answer questions more and more. And if you stay tuned to our social media and over the next couple business days, please feel free to tune in and answer that question that we'll be asking about today's topic of land surveying. And the first person to do so correctly, to answer that question, does get a little treat from Coffey in the mail. So thank you again, everyone, for tuning in. And thank you, Chase, for enlightening us to land surveying. We really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you all next month. Thank you, Chase.
Bye-bye.
Bye.